So this is the first podcast. I find myself doing podcasts. It's a weird journey. So it started about 12 years ago. My best friend bought me davedye.com. About 10 years in, I'd forgotten about it. Asked him whether that was still around, and he said, yeah, he'd been paying for the upkeep or re-registering it every so often, and it was around. So I thought, I'll take that over. I had 2 hard drives of 2 agencies I'd started, and I thought I'll dump all of that stuff on there, organise it so that I can access it, because now when things are digital, if the person in the studio has categorised or spelt something wrong, you can't find it on a hard drive. So I thought I'll go through that so that I can access it. In the process of doing that, I thought I might as well organise it into clients. And as I started to do that, I thought I get used to, because you pitch, you get used to going through the process. You know, this brewery came to us, this was their issue, we did that, he said, she said. And I thought, well, I might as well put those kind of stories down so that it's a complete kind of like case study. It might be useful. I might as well get it down. It's sort of cathartic. Get it done, categorise it. I don't know when I'm going to need these things. As I started to do them, I thought, well, I might as well turn these into, might as well turn this into a blog. I don't know who's interested. It might be students. So I started to get my old stuff, put it down with a little story of how it came about. That then evolved into these kind of blogs that were like using roughs. You know, I had lots of old roughs, being a world-class hoarder. So I'd use the roughs. We came up with this. This was rejected. We redid it like this. Go through the story of that, and started putting those out as blog posts, which started to get quite high numbers. And then one day I was looking for a piece of work by Tom McELLIGOTT, one of my favourite people in the business, who was a big inspiration when I started. So I was Googling away trying to find this particular ad, and I was horrified that there was none of it. There's barely any of his work out there, or his name wasn't barely showing up. Now, this is one of the most talented, famous people in the business when I got in it. Everyone in this country was influenced by him at that point, and he sort of changed American advertising. And I thought, what a shame that he's been written out of history. So I had a kind of diversion from putting out my stuff with the sort of evolution of an idea or art directing something or whatever it may be. And I thought, I'm going to gather together as much of his stuff as I can and put it out there so that it's on the internet. So I sort of ironically titled it Hands Up Who's Heard of Tom McElligott. Wrote a little bit about it, said this guy sort of inspired me, changed advertising, you know, it was kind of very smart stuff at the time. Anyway, put it out there. It's the first one of those kind of things I'd done. The numbers went berserk. So I was getting 5,000 people a day for about 6 weeks consistently, which was way more than I was getting before. So I think it ended up, you know, if I check the numbers on that post, it's like 70, 80,000, which is ludicrous. There's not that many people in advertising, I don't think. And then it appeared in Vice magazine and got picked up. And on Twitter, lots of younger people were sharing it, saying it's about this pre-internet guy called Tom McElligott. So whereas I'd sort of ironically said, hands up who's heard of him, in the same way you might say, hands up who's heard of Donald Trump or something. Actually, people hadn't heard of him and they didn't know him. But lots of sort of younger people and students were saying he's done some really cool stuff, this guy. Anyway, so 2 things happened when I did that. One was it got an enormous response. And the second that was that I got members of the Fowler McElligott creative department who used to work for Tom contacted me, a lot of which said some of the ads that you featured were done under Pat Burnham and they weren't Tom McElligott. And so the others were saying, if you ever come across Tom, he's disappeared. If you ever come across him, please send me his email address or phone number. Nobody knows where he is. So I felt a little bit bad about the Pat Burnham thing. I thought, well, I've completely written him out of the story there. That's a shame he's not got credit. And a few people were from that department were a little bit narky about it. And then I got an email from Pat Burnham saying, and I thought, oh, Jesus, here we go. He's going to say, I did this, I did that. I was creative director on this thing, that thing. And he didn't say any of that. He said, just read your piece. I thought it was great. Thanks very much. It was really interesting, which made me feel even worse. So I thought, what can I do to sort of make it up to him? And I thought, oh, look, I'll do a piece on Pat Burnham and I'll do an interview with him. So I've never done anything like that before. So I wrote out a bunch of questions and I put out an interview, which also did well in numbers. From then on, I sort of started to interview people. I think I interviewed Dave Trott next and found that I had lots of material, again, because I'd hoarded stuff, that not only wasn't on the net, it was not a lot of people had, and it wasn't out there. I think since then I've done probably maybe 50 interviews with various people who have inspired me or I've admired. More recently, I've interviewed people like Joe Sedelmeier. And it's interesting when you listen to the audio and transcribe what someone said. A, it's a grueling process. And B, you never really capture the same personality when you turn it into print. A few people had said you should do a podcast. And I thought, I'm going to try it. I'm going to try that. Out of the blue, a young junior art director I'd seen who'd been sent over to London by his dad to work in this country came in to see me to get a book crit. We talked about the blog post I'd done. It featured some of his dad's work. We talked about Tom McElLIGOTT. I said it's a real shame. I'd love to interview him, but nobody knows where he is. So 3 months later, after I'd seen him, I get an email saying, my dad says try this number. I'm about to try that number. I thought, I'll try him this week. He's probably never going to be there. And that week, Pat Fallon had died. So I thought, well, I can't phone him now because it just feels like it's related. Or I've just thought of him because Pat Fallon's died. I forgot about it. And then about another 3 months later, I thought I'll give it a go. I kind of expected someone grumpy, I guess, because he'd disappeared. Nobody knew where he was. You know, you sort of imagine someone a bit miserable and grumpy who's you know, people said, oh, he could be living in Hawaii, could be here, he was last spotted in this location. And because he's not talking to people and nobody knows who he is, I thought he might be a bit grumpy. Anyway, a very cheery voice picked up, and it was Tom. And the net result, in a kind of circular way, is I've ended up doing my first podcast with Tom, which in a way seems right, because that was the first diversion I took from writing about my own work to this process of interviewing people, which I've done now. So he hasn't spoken to anyone for 25 years. He said he's not going to speak to anyone else for the next 25 years. But fortunately, we had a really good chat. And here's Tom.
Hello.
Tom.
Dave.
How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm good. How are your teeth?
My teeth, they're okay.
Okay.
Yes, I've gotten over that battle.
Okay. Excellent. So, are you comfortable?
Yes, I am.
I've been reading up on you, studying everything. So, I've been reading up on you to double check, and I've been studying your stuff. So I've got a horrific long list of questions. I don't want to put you off so early at the beginning.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah, good. So before we go into the chronological stuff, I suppose one of the things I was going to say is that when I first got into the business, my generation of young ad people used to go to a shop in Charing Cross Road in London where they had remaindered one-show annuals. And we all used to buy them, about £6 or £7 each, and we bought them for the Fallon McElligott work. Because aside from that, it all seemed a bit serious and a bit, you know, it was all very... The Fallon McElligott work seemed fun. It seems smart, intelligent, and we kind of all aspired to do that kind of stuff. And I don't know whether you had any inkling that other countries were studying that stuff or it was having an effect. I mean, that would have been probably 88 in London.
88. You know, I was probably so busy with the day-to-day challenges I was feeling about that stage that I didn't have any idea what anybody else was doing.
Well, it's
nice of you to say that.
Well, it's absolutely true. You know, we were all trading ads and talking about Rolling Stone or Pen or whatever it may be, and it had a huge effect over in London, and I'm sure other countries too. So,
well, that's a great thing to hear.
Well, that's kind of, I guess that was my first introduction to your stuff, and I'm really glad you've agreed to have a chat and be interviewed. I've got together all sorts of stuff from your early days in retail onwards. So I'll go through some stuff chronologically and let's see where we go. But if you want to veer off, say whatever you want. So
no, I'll take your lead and we'll run with it.
Let's see where we go. So first off, where were you raised?
Well, I was raised in this part of the United States, in Minnesota and North Dakota. I actually grew up in Fargo and joined the Marine Corps.
In Fargo, of the famous film.
Yes, the Coen brothers.
Yeah.
It was a pretty funny film.
Did that capture Fargo for you? It seemed
it did indeed.
Did it really? Wow.
Yeah.
And I'm presuming you were brought up in quite a religious family, as we'll come to a bit later, but...
ironically, not.
Really?
We were Episcopalians.
Right.
My father was an Episcopal clergyman. But ours was a very dysfunctional home, and he was a real alcoholic. So, I mean, by the time I was 11 or 12, I had written off God nicely.
Oh, really? Wow.
It didn't seem to work. I didn't see where any of it made any sense, and that was that.
Wow. And what was the first ad that you remember seeing or having an impression on you?
I can tell you the exact ad.
Okay.
It was it must have been 1960, and it was an ad for Volkswagen. And the headline was "Think Small."
Wow. And
it was art directed by Helmut Krohn, and I'm not sure which of the writers
I think
he
that
had
was
working with him at
Julian
that time.
Koenig, I think.
Yes, Julian Koenig.
That's amazing that you remember seeing that and that had a big effect on you, because obviously that's, in retrospect, one of the most famous ads ever.
It is funny because at the time I was probably a high school junior or senior, and I really didn't like advertising. I still don't like it. I think 99.5% of it, if not more, is just awful stuff. But I do remember that ad. I remember seeing it and thinking, "Wow, that's so refreshing. It's so different and original and unlike all the other garbage that you see all the time."
Did you read
the wallpaper and
dishonesty
and
of all the other ads?
Yeah. Of advertising.
So did that inspire you to get into advertising, or?
No, it didn't at all. I just saw it. I saw it, and I definitely remembered it. But no, it wasn't until 10 years later that that I got into the business, and I got into it. I guess I probably thought at the time about that ad and about other good ads that I'd seen, but it didn't inspire me at the time. No.
So did you start to, once you'd seen that ad, the Think Small, did you start to be aware of more advertising that was in that vein, the kind of, as we now call, the creative revolution? Did you take a sort of vague interest in it, or it was just that ad?
Yeah. I took. I would say that's exactly right. I took a sort of vague interest in it. I was from quite early childhood until this very day. I read a lot.
Right.
I'm one of the old school English majors.
Yeah.
And so I have an interest in anything written. I mean, I love reading, and to me that was such a much better way to do advertising than as I say, 99.5% of what you see.
So, did you have a plan A that was not to go into advertising, and advertising ended up being plan B?
I didn't really have very many plans at all.
Okay.
I don't know what I thought I was going to do. I did very poorly in high school because I was extremely withdrawn,
right, and
shy, and a real underperformer. And I had really no idea what I was going to do with my life until I was 17, and then I thought, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I got to get out of here. Meaning Fargo and the whole situation. And I looked into joining the French Foreign Legion.
God, that's...
Believe it or not, I had a few years of French in high school, and I thought, it seemed like a romantic and really challenging thing. And I found out shortly thereafter that as a citizen of the United States, you can't be in the army of any other country,
right,
and remain a citizen. So instead, I joined the Marine Corps, and I joined the Marine Corps because I didn't know what else to do that had any sort of hope to it.
So why did you think of the French Foreign Legion before the Marine Corps in your own country?
Oh,
did it sound more romantic?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it did. I think it sounded like a real challenge. Just a tremendous challenge. Not that the Marine Corps wasn't.
No, I bet. So how did you go from the Marine Corps to writing ads? Not the usual route.
I finished my 3 years in the Marines in the 60s. Came back to the University of Minnesota, and between the GI Bill and working on the side, I worked my way through at the University of Minnesota as an English major.
Right. And then coming out of that, you got a job in retail advertising.
Yeah, I did. I had kind of hoped that I could go to grad school, and if not that, then law school. But Susan was pregnant with our daughter at that very time, and we had absolutely not a penny to our names. And I thought, well, what am I going to do with an English major? And suddenly, it just occurred to me one day that advertising was a possibility. I mean, why not? It seemed to pay pretty well, and I thought, well, at least for a few years, I could, give this a shot and see where it goes.
And what was that first ad agency like? That was a retail ad agency. So you'd seen.
Well, it was actually a really good American department store, not unlike Bloomingdale's and Neiman Marcus. So it was called Dayton's. It's gone now. It's been gone for some years. But I applied there. They had an ad in the paper, and I applied. And it's a funny short story, but I'll give it to you. I went in and I really needed a job, and I thought, oh boy, this is great. I can do this. I know I can. I went in, and sure enough, they accepted me. They wanted to hire me, but there was a strange thing that happened in Dayton's history. Someplace back in the 40s, they had determined that an advertising copywriter, and they had a big advertising department, that an ad copywriter was essentially a secretary.
Right.
And so should be paid as a secretary. So all those years they were paying people, I think at the time they offered me $360 a month, which really was terrible. And so I got home and I talked to my wife about it, and I thought about it. I just couldn't do it. I mean, we were tired of being so fucking poor.
Yeah.
And so I wrote them back a very brief letter, and I said, "Thank you, and I wish you luck in finding an independently wealthy copywriter." And they called me up the next day and said, "Get down here. Well, it's okay." And I said, "You got my letter, right?" And yeah, we got your letter. Anyway, I came down and I had my letter to the head of advertising at Dayton's had gone to the personnel department, which had discovered that advertising copywriters were college graduates.
They didn't know that beforehand.
So suddenly, instead of $360 a month, they offered me $600, which was no great thing.
Yeah.
But I could do that, and I took the job. And I took off like a shot.
Did you?
Yeah, I did. I absolutely loved it. I thought, God, I just.
So why would that be, Tom? Why did you take
Pardon
to it
me?
that? Why did you take to it that quickly?
I have no idea. I really don't think I can explain it. You know what? I think it's because it came to me so easily. I don't want to sound like, I had it all together, but it was something I naturally fit into, and there wasn't a lot in the world that I did fit it into. I mean, I wasn't capable of doing a lot of things, and I discovered virtually overnight that I was good at that, good at advertising copywriting.
Well, it's funny when you recount your letter. That's like a good ad, and it's like one of your ads. I hope you find a independently wealthy copywriter that suits your needs, or whatever it said. You think that's like one of your ads. It's kind of funny, makes its point in a really hard way.
Yeah.
But
Dayton's appreciated me far more than they should have. Within 2 months, I was made copy chief.
Within 2 months. 2 months.
2 months. And I had a half a dozen women copywriters reporting to me, all of whom were senior to me in experience, and they didn't like it.
How bad?
It was horrible. I got shoved into this job that I didn't know anything. I mean, I liked advertising. I just didn't understand it. I didn't really have a clue. But there was something about me that the Daytons liked, and I guess they decided that they would promote me so quickly that. But I was over my head. Way over my head.
It's funny. Normally, when someone is promoted that quickly, I would imagine them being a very self-assured, confident, loud. But you don't sound like you were like that at that age.
No, quite the contrary. I think, I don't know what I appeared like. Kind of a studious sort of guy, glasses and kind of a quiet demeanor. Yeah, whatever it was, they felt confident in doing that, and I'm thankful that they did, because it ended any kind of thought I might have had about doing something different.
So, was the work that you were doing then getting noticed or selling stuff?
No.
What was?
Well, it was the first. One of my first first big learning experiences was that advertising had to sell things.
Yeah.
It's kind of obvious, but when you work in a retail environment and you're writing, at that time it was all print, and and most of these ladies who were reporting to me refused to work for me. So they were kind of, and I had no power to fire them. And so I ended up doing almost all the damned ads for the store.
Right.
And I quickly came to realize, with the help of a couple of very smart merchants, that my ads could make a tremendous difference in sales. I mean, it wasn't just advertising. There was an opportunity to build a bridge between Dayton's and the customer.
Yeah.
And I began to see that. I began to see it for real.
It's interesting. There's a surprising amount of writers who've started working for stores. I think Bill Bernbach started for a store. Certainly Mary Wells did.
Mary Wells did.
Yeah.
Bill Bernbach, you're right.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think of the other person. What's her name?
And it obviously gives you a different grounding. I think there's very few great people start off in great agencies, because I don't think you have that same start of thinking this isn't just a creative exercise. This has to work.
Yeah, and it became very, very quickly apparent that some things worked better than others. I mean, I really had to educate myself and pay attention to what was actually happening in the process of writing an ad to Dayton's customers. I mean, it made me really think about, what this process was doing or was supposed to do.
And did they have art directors there, or was there like templates?
They had art directors. Yes, they had quite good art directors. It was a very good department.
Yeah.
The copywriters were quite weak, but some very good art directors, and a really excellent bunch of merchants. I mean, these retailers were absolutely first rate. Absolutely, they knew what they were doing. It was a very successful store, very high quality, and I had a lot to learn from those merchants.
Sure. So how long did you spend there at Dayton's before you moved on?
Well, I spent about not quite 2 years.
Right.
Yeah, and then my wife met somebody at a garage sale here in Minneapolis who was a copywriter, an ad copywriter, which I sort of was, although I was a retail ad copywriter. And she said, "Oh, well, my husband's in advertising too." And the person said, "Well, why doesn't he get to work at an ad agency, not some retailer?" And I was so new, it hadn't occurred to me, So I thought about it, and I did just that. I applied at a couple of places in Minneapolis. I got an immediate offer at a kind of a not bad, but not terribly good advertising agency. I took the job.
Was that Knox Reeves?
Pardon?
Was that Knox Reeves?
No. It was a place called Cole and McVoy.
Okay.
No, it was, and I didn't stay there long because they wanted to turn me into an account man.
Oh.
They sent me off on a few trips into the countryside to see clients by myself, and they were so impressed that they thought, well, this guy, this was not an agency that thought highly of copywriters.
No, obviously.
And so they thought, let's put him where he'll do the most good. Let's make him an account man.
So they considered that a promotion.
Yes,
yeah.
They wanted to do that. I never let it happen because I very quickly, within 6 months, applied at 2 Minneapolis ad agencies, Campbell Methune,
yeah,
and Knox Reeves.
Right. So did you, at this point, were you aware of agencies like DDB or the Creative Revolution or any of that, or you were just in a bubble doing your own work?
I was really in a bubble, right, because it was so overwhelming. The responsibility, the learning curve was so rapid. There was so much for me to get into my head at Dayton's that I knew quite a bit about retail advertising. I knew the good people who worked at Neiman's and Neiman's and Bloomingdale's and a couple other places, winemakers in Philadelphia. But I didn't really know much about the ad world. I just had not had time even to read an Ad Age or Ad Week or anything. It was just it just sort of came up. It just sort of happened, and I began to figure out the ad world, the agency world a little bit.
Sure. So you go to Knox Reeves,
yes,
which when you went there was dominated by General Mills.
Exactly.
And wasn't a great agency, but a few months in, or maybe a year in, they left, and I read that Ron Anderson said, we're going to start again, it's going to be a creative agency.
Well, that's close enough to the truth.
Okay.
That's close enough. Yes, I went to work for Ron, and for Ron only. I took to him right away. I remember our first meeting. I mean, I was, just nothing really. And
had you heard of Ron at this point? Did you know his reputation or anything?
Had no idea. No idea.
Just a guy called Ron.
It didn't have any slightest idea. I went to Campbell Methune, and they offered me, as I recall, $13,500 a year, which was really a nice increase.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow. And they wanted me. They liked the kind of work I did, which was pretty shitty.
Yeah.
But I went in to see Ron, and he was. I just liked him. I liked what he said about advertising, and I liked being with him. He was a really terrific guy. He is a very terrific guy.
Yeah.
And he offered me $11,500.
Right.
And by God, I went home to my wife again, and this time I took the damn money. I took the job.
Yeah.
So I wanted it enough, and I wanted it enough so that I took a substantial cut.
And that was because of Ron?
To go to work for him.
Yeah. And that was based on Ron rather than the output of the agency or anything else?
Yeah, the agency wasn't all that promising. It was a pretty tired old place. And it had been doing work for General Mills since the 30s.
Right.
And not much in the way of great work. They had a beer account that they did some pretty interesting work for, but that was about it. And so yeah, it wasn't a great agency. I immediately was put on the biggest accounts. I don't know. It just happened. I ended up on General Mills and a couple of other big ones. And wow, when General Mills fired us, the place just about fell apart.
And so what happened there? So what percentage of the billings was General Mills to Knox?
Oh, I'd say 75%.
75%?
Yeah.
And obviously...
So it really hurt us. It really, really hurt us. I mean, it was... it killed the president of the agency.
Literally killed him? Literally
killed him, Tom Kilbride.
Oh.
And I ended up writing his obituary, actually.
Oh.
A couple of days after they fired us, he died. Just died of a heart attack.
Oh.
And it was very sad. And I didn't know what to make of advertising at that time. Really, I was just really not well informed about anything. I felt terrible about losing all the people we lost, and about Tom Kilbride, but in retrospect, the good thing for me was that it forced me, just as Dayton's had forced me by making me copy chief. It forced me to become the agency's. I went from being the junior writer of Knox Reeves to the senior writer. There were like 3 or 4 writers that kept on, and Ron chose me as the number one.
The copy chief. And is that when you got together with Ron as a team?
Yes, it is.
So.
And I began to actually work with Ron.
Yeah.
I mean, before that, he was really running an ad agency. He was more,
So now he had more time, and
yeah.
And
I discovered first of all, there's just not enough good to say about Ron. He, as people go, he's just a terrific human being, and an immensely talented art director.
Yeah.
Who didn't really? I don't think the world ever saw the full power of Ron Anderson's capability, because
really?
he was not one for taking big chances.
Right.
Just he was a careful man. He had grown up very, very poorly. I mean, absolutely dirt poor. And I think a part of him was just so grateful that he arrived at a secure, well-paying position in life that he didn't. He wasn't about to shake things up.
Right.
But he was a wonderful man, and he was an absolutely brilliant art director. Just brilliant.
So Ron was very... it's interesting. I discovered a blog recently about Ron, and I hadn't heard of Ron, I must confess. And there's lots of his work and lots of stories, and it's one of the warmest, most positive blogs I've come across anyone. Every picture, he's got a beaming big smile, and he's obviously very, very well thought of. And I think one of the things I read in, I think it was Communication Arts about you two, is that you were like a sort of yin and yang. You were much more difficult at this point. Is that accurate?
Well, I was always difficult.
Really?
Oh yes. I mean, I used to tell Susan, I don't know when I'm going to get fired. Like on a weekly basis. I really didn't like advertising. I just really abhorred it. It was it was, you know, totally lacking anything resembling verisimilitude.
Right.
I mean, it absolutely was just crap. And but there was this small part of it that I did like. And Ron Anderson understood me better than anybody in my life.
Really?
He knew that I was, you know, a very driven guy, a very, very driven man. And he knew that I could fly off the handle, and I could be very difficult. And from the day that he hired me, he protected me.
Did he really? And what would you
ran interference for me.
What would you be difficult about? Ads not being sold, briefs, or everything, everything and anything?
I didn't have a lot of patience with advertising in general.
Yeah.
And especially with bad, really, really bad advertising, you know. And there was a lot of it around, and there still is, just tons of it. So I would get really. I was a very insistent, driven. You know, I wanted it my way or no way.
Well, all of a sudden, you start to get lots of work appearing in the one show, the New York Art Directors Club, from Minneapolis, which was no mean feat.
Yeah. At the time, it was like there was only New York. There wasn't really interesting work being done across the United States, with a few exceptions. Jay Chiat.
Yeah.
A couple other guys. A guy named Harry Jacobs in Richmond, who was quite a fine just a fine art director and another fine man. But there wasn't much. I looked to all. Somebody about that time, somebody told me something that made a big difference in the way I approached advertising. And the guy was the creative director of Minneapolis BBD&O.
Right.
I happened to meet him at some function, and he said, "You know, Tom, you must stop comparing yourself to the advertising that's being done in Minneapolis. And you must begin to look at the advertising being done in New York and London or other places as your standard.
Okay.
Make that your standard, not this awful crap that's being done here."
So, what would you have known from London at that point? Did you look at D&ADs and work from London at that point?
I think I remember seeing. First of all, the only thing I knew about London was a reel or so or two of commercials. Maybe I saw some really nice commercials, and I thought they were so fresh, and they had such first of all, they were well written.
Yeah.
A lot of American advertising is just about bad writing. And anyway, so what I knew of the Brits, I had seen on a couple of sample reels that had come by my way.
I'm guessing CDP and BMP would be the reels of the day that probably made their way over.
Yeah, somehow I don't know how I got them, but there were always reels coming in out of the shop.
So at this point, do you start studying the New York Art Directors Club and those kind of books? Because again, I know that you were both very ad geeks about who did what and which page this was on and all of that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, Ron and I used to have a game, and we could be walking. We used to take these incredibly long walks in New York, when we'd go there, we liked to walk, and we'd walk the entire city, the length of the damned island. And we had this little game where we would say, I would say, Neil Drossman.
Yeah.
And he would say, Neil Drossman. Elian Gargano. And then I would say, what you see here is a television repairing a man.
Yeah, I know that ad. Yeah.
Yeah. And we'd do that. We would go around the country, and we knew exactly who was doing the great work. Exactly. The work, at least the work we respected.
It's interesting because most of the people I know that are very, very good are exactly the same. They're equally geeky. And it's difficult to say to people starting in the business why that will help. But I guess it's an obsession. I don't know. But they're the same, you know.
It certainly was an obsession for me for many years.
So you coming into sort of the mid to late 70s, who would have been your heroes at the time? Say McCabe, Lois, Birnbach? I don't know who would have.
Well,
who did you aspire to be?
I knew exactly who my heroes were, you know, and I've never forgotten. They start with that ad that Koenig and Krohn did in 1960, because I revisited that, of course.
Yeah.
And then there were a couple of guys had an agency in New York who wrote very witty, intelligent, charming stuff. And
who was that?
Ralph Amirati.
Yeah.
And Marty Puris.
Yeah.
And then the great Ed McCabe.
Yeah.
And the equally great Sam Scally.
Right.
Carl Alley.
Yeah.
Emil Gargano. And that's the sort of it was that there was a small but terrific group of New York writers who I quickly discovered once this fellow told me to start looking at the work being done in New York. I quickly discovered that there were probably not more than a dozen really, really terrific copywriters and art directors in New York. So maybe a few more than that.
Did you ever consider going to New York to work for any of those guys? I
did.
And how did that go?
I opened an agency instead.
Right.
Yeah. What happened was that they were very good to me at Bozell and Jacobs, but it was really, I'm sorry to say, no place for an aspiring copywriter. So I really, they promoted me and were generous, but Ron and I were used, basically. They'd fly us all over America to these different offices of Bozell and Jacobs to put out fires and get new business. And it seemed like never did anything get produced.
Right.
I mean, and here was the difference. I think I told you this once. That Ron was happy with a layout.
Yeah.
With a great layout, and I wasn't. And that was the only thing that separated us.
So for you, it had to run, otherwise it didn't exist.
Yeah, it wasn't valid.
Yeah.
It wasn't valid. I mean, what good did it do? What was the point? You know, I just didn't see it. And Ron just was a more genteel and more accepting guy. You know, he just wasn't. Didn't have that kind of fire.
So did that, Tom, lead to one of the big award-winning agencies of the late 70s, Lunch Hour Inc.?
You know, I got to say, in retrospect, I was pretty irrepressible as an advertising writer. I was working at one point for Bozell and Jacobs and I was writing a lot of advertising there. I had a company of my own called Lunch Hour Limited.
Limited, was it? Yeah.
With Fallon and Ron, and then I had a fellow in Des Moines, Iowa, an account guy I met who was just a crackerjack account man, all by himself, named Richard H. Gertis.
Yep.
And for Mr. Gertis, I wrote some terrific stuff, and he paid me, and we had this. Our relationship was he'd call me up, say, Tom, I've got this bank, or I've got this trucking company, or I've got this, and I want you to do a campaign. And it wasn't a lot of money, but I was happy for the opportunity. Yeah. So I was writing day and night.
Well, so how did you pull in those extra clients? So lots of them would be like the Red Cross. I don't know whether that was lunch hour, but there was lots of stores and charities and public service that seemed to go through.
A lot of public service. Well, here's what Ron and I did instead of doing ads for real people. I quickly found out at Bozell and Zakis that if I wanted to actually get ads that ran, they better be for public service, where I had some leverage, because I would never get them through the impossible
tiers of marketing people and stuff
of Bozell.
Yeah.
So again, to put it shortly, I basically found out, and Ron did as well, that we could do any number of public service things. People wanted it. And we began to do a lot of public service advertising.
And was that paid, or I used to try and get lots of extra work where the deal would be, I'll do it for nothing as long as you let me do what I want. But did you get paid too?
Something like that. I didn't put it quite as out in the open as you just said. But yes, the unspoken truth was that here we are senior people at a rather large agency, and we are willing to do for you for free what we charge clients a lot of money for.
There's more of a hidden pressure to go with what you said. So how did you start to work for the Episcopal Church?
Well, I had never entirely lost my connection with the Episcopal Church. My wife's father was an Episcopal clergyman, as well as my own father. Oh. So it was a part of my life. I'm not I'm not a great Christian or believer or anything, but because I knew a lot of clergymen, and just I had a familiarity with the church, and there was an enterprising young clergyman here in Minneapolis who came to me one day and asked if I'd do some advertising, and that was it.
I always thought it was interesting that in those award books, the coolest ads in the book would be for the Episcopal Church. There'd be all these cool New York agencies, but the really cool ads were the ones you did for the church. They seemed like the smartest, funniest. How did you get those past the guys at the church? I don't know what the committee was like to approve them, but...
Well, the committee was pretty small.
I bet.
It fortunately didn't have to go through the Episcopal Church in New York,
right?
Who I did meet with a few times, the presiding bishop, but it was a small number of people here in Minneapolis who made the choice, and I have to say George Martin, he was just a great guy to work with. And he Pretty soon these ads were being run all over the damn country. They were being copied by the Methodists and the Lutherans and the Presbyterians. Yes, oh yeah. And we looked at we made no argument. I mean, it was fine. Take it.
Yeah.
Go with it.
But they were very. I'm trying to think of what the right word is. Racy. Very. I'm trying to think of the headlines off the top of my head. But the in a church set up by.
Yeah, man with 6 wives.
Man with 6 wives. Forgiveness comes as standard, or I can't remember the exact line. But
it's how does it go?
That doesn't feel like the sort of line that will float straight past a lot of clergymen.
Oh God, it certainly wouldn't have floated by my father. I remember. Oh God, I remember coming home and maybe somewhere. Well, I was maybe 12, 13, somewhere in there. And I had learned in school that the Episcopal Church was indeed started by Henry VIII.
Yeah.
And I had the lack of tact to tell my father that, and he didn't like it, and I didn't tell him that again. But later in life, I thought, let's get honest here. I mean, the Episcopal Church is disappearing from the face of the earth because it has it's of no consequence, of absolutely no consequence anymore to anybody. And so, I mean, let's get the truth out there. Let's put it out there. There are these great moments, these things that happen in history, in church history, and in history. And God, let's not run from them. Let's embrace them.
Funny. So do you think that some of those come from that moment with your father?
Oh,
that
definitely.
Sort of denying it, that however many, 15 years later, you kind of turn that denial into some ads that confronted all those kind of issues.
Oh, most assuredly. I had my own take on the Episcopal Church.
Yeah.
And it was rather cynical. But there was a part of me that really actually loved some of these clergy and some of the Episcopal traditions, the service itself, the Anglo-Catholic side of it all. And I just had my own take on it, and that's what those ads were about.
Yeah. So, did you consider when you start to consider setting up an agency? You're working with Pat Fallon. Was he at Bozell, or how did you come across?
He
Pat?
was at Martin Williams.
Right.
No, was it Martin? No, he was at Stevenson and Associates.
Right. And did you consider Anderson Fallon McElligott? Was that a consideration? You were working with Ron at the time, presumably.
Oh, I really wanted Ron. I mean, I certainly knew which side my bread was buttered on, and I knew very well that Ron had kept me going. I mean, I wonder how many times he stopped me from being fired.
Oh, really?
I mean, really. He was my man. He was a terrific guy. He was loyal to me. As long as I would turn out interesting work, he would do anything. I've never seen a man appreciate advertising, a really good line, better than Ron Anderson. It used to blow him off his feet. He'd call me at night. I'd leave something on his desk at the office, and something I'd been thinking about. Can he call me up at 11 o'clock at night and say, God, I got this thing you left on my desk. It's so great.
Yeah.
I just want to say, oh, it's so great. We're going to do this, Oh, so anyway, Ron was like, he was a treasure to me. And Pat Fallon was the best and remains the best account man or account executive I've ever worked with. I mean, he had guts, and he had good instincts, and he was a most of the time, a pretty funny little guy.
Was he?
And I liked him until I didn't like him.
Sure. So how did you come across
Pat? That's how
Pat?
life goes.
How did you meet Pat when you're in different agencies?
Well, we both had a piece of the same business, his agency and Bozell, and that was the first bank system, which is now Wells Fargo, in Minneapolis. And here's how it happened. I happened to be in my client's office. A man named Fred Sin, and he was busy on the phone or doing something, and there was a letter it said Stevenson and Associates on his desk, freshly opened letter, and I started to read this letter because he didn't mind, it was just out in the open. I started to read it, and I loved the letter. The letter was taking somebody on, somebody had done something really stupid, and this fellow who was writing was mad as hell and articulate, and it was Pat Fallon. It was his letter, and it just so happened that I read that letter, and I didn't ever forget it. I thought, well, then that's an account man. That's my kind of guy.
Yeah.
And about 6 months later, Pat called me up and said, "Would you like to be part of a freelance agency? Something on the side." And I said, "Of course." I said, "You're the guy that wrote that letter." And I said, "I love that letter." I said, "You've got,"
And that was Lunch Hour.
Lunch Hour Limited.
Lunch Hour. So what was that? A loose collective of freelance ad people?
It was three of us. It was Ron and Pat and me, and that's all it ever was.
So how did that not become Fallon's with Ron too?
Well, it almost did. It really almost did, but it never quite got to the size where it was convincing enough to Ron that he would do it. That he would give up Bozell the security, and he had some good connections at Bozell. David Bell was his partner, his account guy there. Sure. And he liked Bell a lot. I think it just never quite got to the size. It got to a ridiculous point, though. We had clients calling us nationally.
You had national clients calling you, really?
Calling us. We didn't have a secretary. We didn't have a phone number. I mean, we had to be reached at our full-time agencies. And so, it was like telling us something, and Ron wasn't really listening, and I was.
So he didn't make that jump possibly because of his background? Just he wanted the security, and maybe it just...
I think I don't know. I don't want to be...
No, sure.
I don't want to be put words in Ron's mouth, but
sure.
My impression always was that he really came from I had a bad family, and Ron really had a bad family.
Yeah. And
he grew up. I will tell you this. He grew up in a bus, living in a bus parked in his dad's backyard. And all of his brothers and sisters were alcoholics, and his dad was too. And he just needed that security. It just wasn't as easy for him to say, "Fuck it, I'll just go start an agency." I don't know why it was for me. Probably because I'm crazy, but he just wasn't that way. And I tried. I'll tell you what. I tried for a year.
Yeah.
A full year to convince Ron to come with me.
It's a shame. I remember you saying on the phone, I wish he'd have done it. I would have had a happier life.
Yeah.
Which is an amazing thing to say.
Well, what I think would have happened is that eventually I would have destroyed myself, as I seemed to have intended to do all along. But I think Ron would have given me another 5 years or 3 years or something, Because Ron's loyalty to me was very, very, very high. We liked each other, and we shared a lot of things, and he really liked my work. I mean, this is a man who really appreciated a good copywriter.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the problem was, that Fallon and I were too much alike. A couple of Irish hotheads.
Yeah.
And both of us were driven, really driven. And it was bound to come to blows, at some point. And it did.
But obviously worked very well in the early days. So how did you come to work with Nancy?
Oh, I worked with Nancy all the time that she was at Knox Reeves and Moselle, and I worked with her a lot, and I liked her a lot.
She's one of the few art directors I can find in the early 70s awards books from America that didn't squash all the type together. Virtually, you look at those awards books and they've just crammed everything together, whereas she never did that.
The old X-Acto knife.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nancy is also a wonderful person. Really, she's still a great friend of mine. Very great friend.
So, what do you remember day one? So you turn up. Where were you? Presumably above a shop, like most startups, or how did you start?
We got the very cheap space in what is the downtown area of Minneapolis, above a restaurant, a Greek restaurant, and we were extremely careful about spending and about everything, actually.
Did you do ads for that Greek restaurant? I presume you did.
No, we actually never did. It would have been a privilege. It was quite a good restaurant. It was called Peter's.
Right.
But it was a Greek restaurant.
Well, the first ad that you run for yourself was great. It looks very, very confident, business-like and confident. Doesn't look like a wacky, crazy ad agency.
That's exactly what I said.
You're all in sort of shirt sleeves,
That's
but
what
with
I said
ties.
to my partners as we sat on the front porch of my house in St. Paul. I said, I want us to look like lawyers.
Yeah, that's exactly what it looks like. Yeah,
good, smart lawyers. I want all this bullshit with the jeans and the other crap. I said out the window, because we're going to be creating advertising that is so revolutionary that they won't buy it from people who look like they're hippies. They'll buy it from people who look like they're smart.
They're businessmen,
yeah. And they know what they're doing.
So, even when you started, you felt that you were going to be creating revolutionary advertising? You were that confident? And...
Oh, yes. Listen, I'll tell you the truth. I didn't know if it would work, really. To me, it was always an experiment. I didn't know. I mean, how was this? This really hadn't been done outside of New York, and who was I to think that we could somehow make this work in a nice little mid-sized American city, Minneapolis. Who was I? I thought, well, I'm in this for the experiment, which is a dangerous thing to think, because it means that, that you're kind of irresponsible. I mean, what it meant to me is that I was more than willing to fire clients, or not to hire clients who I didn't believe we could do good work for.
So what would be the before you'd started, what aspect did you think was going to be revolutionary? The way you spoke to people, or the way you used?
Well, here's what I thought. I thought we would do. I thought we would do fresh. There's a sort of torturous ubiquity to advertising. That it's all so horribly unoriginal. I wanted our work to be different. I wanted it to be persuasive and really, really fresh. And I didn't want it to go out the doors if it wasn't. And I was in it for that. And fortunately, my partners and I had, certainly in the beginning, we were very forthright with one another about this. And I mean, for the first year and a half that we were in business, every account person that we hired, I was part of the hiring process. I interviewed them.
Right.
I didn't want another, tasteless, moronic account person.
Yeah.
In this shop. And I felt we were just going to do interesting work. It worked like Marty Puris and Ralph Ambarati were doing, or Ed McCabe.
Yeah. So what was the first piece of business you won or worked on when you started?
The very first piece of business was essentially a kind of a freebie. And it was a place called 7 South 8th for Hair.
Yeah, I know all those ads.
I hired a couple of young guys out of Gray Advertising in Minneapolis, one of whom had worked in New York, Dean Hansen,
yep.
And one of whom hadn't, but both seemed really to march to a very different drummer. Probably one of the very best moves I ever made. Dean Hansen is,
he did some great work.
Without any doubt, a really fabulous art director, and a really decent human being.
So that work didn't seem like a lot of work in America at the time. It seemed flip, fresh. It looked like it took 10 minutes in a good way. It looked like someone said, why don't we do that? That'll be fun. I'm sure it wasn't that easy,
something?
But
I beat those guys to death.
Really? Rejecting work?
Oh, God, did I reject a lot of work. Yeah, we had nothing. I mean, I didn't have some, we needed to make money. We needed to do things. I didn't have the right to have two people I was paying money to sit in the downstairs undeveloped space at the back of the agency for 4 weeks writing ads for a place that cut hair.
For free.
And I was just determined that we were going to do a great advertising campaign for this little place. There was no reason not to, and we were going to do it.
Well, it's funny that, like most of the best stuff, it looks so easy. Just looks like, as I say.
It's like gymnastics.
Yeah.
You know, in that way. I mean, you practice for, years to get a move down that looks so easy and so fluid. And yet it was, oh God, that was a hard thing to get done. It was, I can remember the day that I finally, they kept coming to me with these ideas, and I can remember the day they came in with this thing. Man, I felt so great, because I was beginning to doubt myself. I thought, oh, what am I, am I going to get something out of this? Or am I just nuts here?
And they won lots of awards in all the shows straight away, year one.
Oh, everything.
Yeah.
Everywhere, everything. And, they're a couple of great guys. But Dean especially is just a gentleman and a decent human being, really a nice guy, hell of a nice guy.
Yeah.
And really one of the great talents. I'd say that Dean and Nancy Rice and Ron Anderson and a guy named Mark Johnson.
Yeah. Porsche.
Were my favorite art directors of my career. There are others too. I probably should mention, but I'm not going to go on. But those four people, I really have tremendous respect for.
So having done that work, that's a useful start. Sets the bar very high. People are talking about it, won lots of awards. So when other business comes in, presumably you've got some sort of bar to say the kind of work that you do.
Yeah.
So what work followed, Tom? What did you start to win and gain momentum from there?
Almost immediately, first of all, the ads that I wrote for the paper, for us, it worked. Within a month, or 5 weeks at the outside, we had $4 or $5 million worth of business.
Within a month?
As a direct result of that ad.
Wow. Where did you run that ad?
We just ran it in the Minneapolis paper.
That was just a Minneapolis ad, was it?
Minneapolis only. We couldn't afford the $55,000 it would take to run in New York.
Wow. So that brought in what accounts?
Well, it brought in, I'm trying to think of the early accounts. Well, it brought in ITT life insurance.
Was that a Minneapolis-based account?
Yes, yes, it was.
Okay.
That was a serious account.
Yeah.
That was a real account with real people and real billings. And Nancy and I did a campaign that I'm still proud of.
Yeah, they're great. Those.
It was a wonderful client. God, this is the greatest guy. Funniest damn client on the planet. It was that, and a few other. I can't. It all sort of fades at this point. But
sure.
we had a department store, not Donald's or not Dayton's, but another one in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
That was still very viable in the real business, and we did work for them. And I did that. Some of that was Dean. We didn't. It wasn't. We had no money, no budget. We couldn't make big time advertising. I mean, we had nothing. So we had to somehow make something of nothing.
Yeah.
And it was not an easy task. But anyway, it all came to good. We had good clients. They were just the kind of clients we wanted, and they bought our work, and our work made us famous.
Yeah. Well, what was great about ITT also is it's a very different flavour from the other work. Sort of quite serious, businessy. There's a different vibe from certainly the barbers, hairdressers work.
Yeah.
Well,
you're talking about life and death,
Yeah.
And I think ultimately insurance is, for sure it's boring, but it's also if you're forced to talk about it, it really is about life and death.
Yeah.
And it had to have a gravitas. certain gravitas.
And of course, you seem to clean up all the bits of business with Minnesota in front of their name, the zoo, the hockey team, the bank, etc.
Oh yeah. Oh, the zoo came in right away.
Right.
Yeah, and we got some wonderful work.
So what
was done by Bob Berry. Some of it was done. We hit our stride right off the bat. Now, I'm not going to say we didn't make mistakes, because we did. We made all sorts of mistakes, and I personally fucked up.
In what sense? Well, how did you fuck up?
Oh, I just fucked up. I mean, I just didn't know any better sometimes. I try and I just fail.
Trying too hard?
No, or maybe not trying in ways that I appreciated sufficiently.
Right.
I mean, we got in some accounts in the first year and a half or 2 years, some real opportunities to do really original advertising for some pretty interesting little brands. And I can remember 2 or 3 of those that I really let the client down on.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I thought I was doing my job, and I wasn't. The work was, the work wasn't there.
So what work put you on the national map? When did you go from being a good regional agency to one that was noticed nationally?
Well, I think the account that put us on the national register was the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
That happened very, very quickly and very unexpectedly. They were talking to prominent New York agencies, and the big ones. And they I think they thought they would include us just out of curiosity. And we got in there, and Mr. Fallon, being the tiger that he was, and me being the perfectionist that I was, we just sunk our teeth into it, and we got the fucking account,
So how was there any stunts involved? So I've seen different things where you've got ads on tanks for Scots and all different self-promotional things. Was there anything like that, or was it a straightforward pitch and your work won the day?
It was a straightforward pitch. Fortunately, the client gave us a second chance. They came out, and the first time I was so hungry for this account, so absolutely determined that I would work on this account, that I had turned the agency upside down for a solid month and a half. And instead of presenting one campaign, which I normally did, I presented like 4 or 5.
Right.
And it was all, none of it was bad work. It was all pretty good work. But it was confusing. It was confusing to the client. Here I was, they came out, and I was standing there telling them, this is a great ad, this is a great ad, and this would make a great campaign. And they were just fucking confused. Yeah. And they got back to New Jersey, and the client called me, terrific woman, and said, Tom, we don't know what you're trying to do. I mean, what do you want for us to do? And we don't know that. And George Lois and some other people are coming up with some very specific ideas.
Right.
And I said, oh. Well, first of all, I said, thank you so much for this call. I said, I do know what I want you to do. And I'm sorry, I obviously overwhelmed you with stuff because I got so excited.
Yeah.
And it was a stupid thing to have done. And let me have another chance. Let me get back to you in 1 week. And let me go through the material that I've got. I've got a lot of them. And let me go through them, and I'll come out to you, and we'll revisit this. And she did. She agreed to that. And I came out there, and by God, they bought us. They bought the agency. I could not believe it.
Amazing. Well, I think that campaign is the forerunner to The Economist. If you look at, I don't think The Economist would have been done without that going before it. Some of the lines are even the same.
Could be. The Economist is wonderful.
It's great. The Economist is great.
Just wonderful, yeah.
So that was the campaign that launched you on a national stage.
Well, yeah. In terms of, we were creatively, we had a big reputation virtually overnight. Almost overnight. 2 years. We certainly were quite well known very quickly. But that didn't legitimize us as the Journal did. The Journal gave people clients permission to consider us seriously as a serious ad agency.
So there's one thing that seems to run through most of the work we've talked about so far, which is honesty. Even when you look at Rolling Stone, there's not many clients who would feel comfortable. Well, we can go through from the church work to the Rolling Stone to admit your faults, or to admit where you used to be, or to not just talk about the bullshitty, glossy end of how you want to put yourself over. Do you know what I mean? The Rolling Stone essentially says, yeah, we used to be hippies, but it's changed. A lot of it has a unusual, surprising honesty, particularly for American work in the period.
Yeah. American work was well. First of all, America has a hard time understanding irony. Still does. This is not. We're not like you guys, where you have Jonathan Swift. You have a history. You have a tradition of real understanding of the idea of irony, and so there's very little appetite for anything that would be slightly satirical or ironic. And American advertising at the time that we were in it was, except for that wonderful work being done by Emirati and Purist and McCabe and Scally, it lacked all verisimilitude. It was not truthful work. There was not. One of the things that impressed me most about Bill Bernbach was he said the most important thing in advertising is the truth. And I think because people, advertising people, for some reason, assume almost immediately once they're in an ad agency that it's all about bullshit.
Yeah.
That it's all about telling lies. Or mistruths or half-truths. And the actual fact of the matter is that if you're going to cut through to somebody, if you're going to actually make a connection, build a bridge, you're going to do it on the basis of truth. Some truth. Maybe not all of the truth, but some truth.
And I think that was really well put over in the Advertising Association work, representing the advertising business itself.
Yeah.
Broke that down really well.
Yeah, I flew down to Florida to present that to a big meeting of the American Association of Advertising Agencies. And so I presented it to this, and here I was, this geek fresh off the prairie. And I was presenting to the presidents of all of America's biggest ad agencies in a huge room in a big fancy hotel. But they were good. Carl Alley didn't like it much.
Carl Alley, really?
Yeah, I felt bad about it. I think Carl Alley is one of the great people. I felt bad about it, but other people of influence liked it a lot, and it sailed through.
Well, it made the case like a lawyer. I thought it was great.
Well, that's what I thought. A lot of that campaign was written by a fellow by the name of
Rod Kilpatrick, was it?
Rod Kilpatrick,
yeah.
Who was a Harvard graduate and a very thoughtful guy. You know, and he and I really, that was kind of our campaign. We, as copywriters, we kind of like, it's probably, that may be one of the most collaborative efforts I've ever done.
Was it really?
With a writer, with another writer.
Well, one of the pieces of copy is my old writer's favourite piece of copy ever. It's the one that ends, and this, I can't remember, it's something like, "Tricked you again," I think is the last. I don't know if that rings a bell, but it says it's all about advertising, being subliminal and tricking you in it. And the last line is, "This was a trick, tricked you again." Do you remember that?
No, I don't.
No. Okay.
But it's been a long time.
Yeah. And then the other thing that again is one of the campaigns of the 80s, I guess, is the Rolling Stone work.
Do you know that it's a little known fact that campaign was written by Pat Fallon?
Oh, really? I've
Yes.
never heard that.
Well, I'm here to tell you. Because I was right there when he wrote it. We were sitting across from, what's his name? At the Jan Winter.
Yeah.
We were sitting across from Jan Winter at his Fifth Avenue office in New York. Pat and me and a couple of creative people we brought along, an account person. And Winter was explaining this disconnect that had occurred between the time he founded the magazine in San Francisco during the height of the hippie 60s, and what it had become. And what it had become was a serious magazine doing, with Hunter S. Thompson doing brilliant work, and in brilliant photography, and it was the whole magazine was had grown up and was quite a different matter. It was a magazine to have taken seriously, and so I was sitting there at the table right next to Pat. We were listening to Winter, and Pat. I see Pat writing on his pad, and I look over, and he pushes it my way, and it says, "Perception, reality."
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I did in the cab on the way back to LaGuardia was give that piece of paper to the copywriter who was assigned to the account, a guy by the name of Bill Miller.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't think we can do better than this. To be honest with you.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we'll spend a lot of time trying to beat this. This is a wonderful thing.
And were there any images from that, or it was just the words perception on one side, reality on the other?
No. I've got to give enormous credit to two people for it's really all images. You know, it's. I hired a guy out of Shai-Day, named Human Purdabari.
Yeah.
Human, I don't think even finished high school, but he was a self-taught. He was a very bright. I assume he's still alive. He's a very bright man, and really very different way of thinking about the world. And Bill Miller, who was more of the corn-fed Minnesota type, But those guys came up with the images that really made that campaign. But hey, it was Pat's writing.
It's a good start.
It was Pat's idea.
So, when you looked for guys like Human, what did you look for in creative hirings?
Well, Human was my first really big out of Minneapolis or out of the Midwest hire. He had done great work for Nike, and he had worked with Lee Clow and other good people, and I just loved what he did. I loved his work. I thought, this is so good. It's breathtaking. And I got him to come up during our company annual picnic, which fortunately was a beautiful summer day. I think it was June. And there were all these girls and guys who were all drinking beer all day and playing various games and just having a hell of a lot of fun. And Human liked them all, and they all liked Human.
Right.
Because Human really didn't want the job. He really didn't want to come. God almighty, Minneapolis, Minnesota, are you kidding? This is a Southern California guy. So anyway, he liked us enough so that I offered him more money than I thought I really ever could offer anybody, and I got him in the shop. And he was so good for us. He was so good.
I think, did he do pen as well, didn't he, Human?
Pen, yes, he did pen.
Yeah. But what would you look for in terms of personality? Would you look for that same difficult spirit that you had? Would you look for just hard work? What would be the...
I would look for a hard worker. I wanted more than anything else to know that somebody had fire in their belly.
Yeah.
I wanted fire, and I didn't care how they. As I said earlier, I was when I went to Dayton's, I was a very, very shy, introverted, quiet sort of guy. I didn't go around really exploding everywhere and bouncing off the walls, although it may seem like that. It's not really what happened. I was people on the bus would say, "Well, there goes an accountant." But what I looked for, whether they were, I didn't care what the personality was. I wanted them to want what I wanted as much as I wanted it. And what I wanted was great advertising. And I wanted them to do it and to make no exceptions.
And when we spoke last, you said something like, when Mike Lescarbo came, I didn't have time to train him, and he ended up going to Lee Castellini in London. What would you training someone be? What would that involve?
By example. Right. I always wrote right till the last day.
Right.
I wrote all the time. I mean, even in fact, it was one of my great problems in remaining in the advertising world was that it became almost impossible for me to write. I had to be more of the business guy and more of the more on that
more
side.
Of a front man.
It really wasn't me. It really wasn't me. I was a copywriter. I just happened to be a good one. And Mike was a product of three people. Lescarbo, Rod Kilpatrick, a very good friend of mine named Dick Thomas, who worked with Ron Anderson, and me. We were all copywriters, and we all took Mike on as a sort of project. He wanted very much to come to the agency. He wanted to really, he had fire in the belly, and we were just growing so fast. It was so crazy that he needed more than I could give him at the time, and more than Rod could, and Dick Thomas got mad at me and left. So he said, what should I do, Tom? And I said, God, it would be so great. It would be so great for you. You haven't had any college, or very little college. Why don't you just beg your way into Delaney and see if he'll take you on?
And that's what happened. That's how he got there.
Yeah, I talked to Delaney too about him. And I said,
did you? Did you know?
I think he's got great promise, but those wonderful long copy ads that you write, he's not up to snuff for that at all. And you could really help this guy, and I think he could help you.
Right. Well, there are certain things. There are certain skills that recently, when obviously you've been out of the business 25 years now.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. One of the skills that people don't have anymore is using few words. So one of the things I often show them is the posters you did for Porsche that use 3 words per poster: fire the chauffeur, it beats analysis. And it's something that people can't do anymore. And it's interesting, they're 3 words each. It almost looks like you've given yourself the discipline of not using any more 3. It can't be coincidence that each use 3. I don't know, but is that something you can teach? Because it's tough to do.
I think it probably isn't. I think I could see it being taught in some, feckless journalism course someplace, but that only came to me with experience.
Yeah.
I only had once I didn't have the assurance, the self-assurance, the confidence to write like that until I'd been in advertising for a bit longer. A lot of those shorter, better lines were the product of my final 5 years of advertising.
Yeah. Is that the 10,000 hours? Once you've put in your 10,000 hours, you can do these things. So, around 5-6 years in, you sell to Scully McCabe.
Scully McCabe, which overnight then sold to Ogilvy and Mather.
So you didn't know that, or that wasn't part of the plan?
Oh, I think we heard about it somewhere in there. I'm not sure about those details. There was a lot of stuff going on. All I know is that we were soon not just part of Scully, but part of Ogilvy, which was okay with me.
Was it? So you were obviously doing great at the time. What made you sell relatively early like that? Just take some of the pressure off, or? Yeah. Well, first of all, I had 4 partners. A money guy, another account man named Fred Sin. I mentioned him earlier. He was my client at one point. And Pat and Nancy. I think at the time we actually sold, the money looked pretty damn good. Yeah.
And it's a very dicey business.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure just how long it would be before I was fired by somebody.
You were feeling that then?
Well, I knew that I was, I knew that I'd have to go down that way.
Because you were demanding?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was no day at the beach.
And how did that work out? Did you start to deal with Ed at all or not? It's funny. I spent.
Did you have what?
Did you start to deal with Ed at all, Ed McCabe?
No, I never, I never even met Ed during the process. He was kind of out of the agency.
Right.
He was into this. He was going to do the Paris to
Dakar, yeah.
Dakar race, and he kind of got off on this thing, and that was kind of the end of it for Ed. I admired Ed enormously, and Sam too. But they never really interfered. They never got in my way. They were good to their word. It was there's nothing wrong with those guys.
Right. I spent about 9 months trying to interview Ed, which is a whole different conversation. But I just wondered how that went.
He's a difficult guy.
Yep.
Everybody knows that.
Yeah.
But then a lot of us are.
Possibly.
But he, what a great copywriter.
Yeah. So, between selling then and leaving, what happened? You just got to the point where you were getting more frustrated, or?
Yeah. Well, it's my responsibility ultimately that it didn't work out. I just had so much going on that it was killing me. I was trying to make speeches all over the hell and back, and I'm probably the worst guy to give a speech in the world. But I was flying all over the goddamn country and the world giving these stupid speeches. I was judging advertising awards festivals and going to things like the Advertising Association meeting in Florida, all kinds of crap. And in addition, I was trying to remain a really good copywriter, and trying to keep the output of the shop at a level where I was sure that we were giving it our best. And it took a toll. It really took a toll.
So you were kind of forced into being a spokesman more than a creative director or copywriter.
Yeah. I just crashed and burned. So that's what happened. I had my alcoholism kind of ran in my family a little bit.
Right.
Toward the end there, I hadn't had anything to drink for many years.
Yeah.
And in the final months of my tenure at the agency, I had a couple of real bad spells with alcohol, real blackouts.
Right.
It's just my problem. I just was overwhelmed. I didn't know what to do.
And that was just pressure, just too much
pressure.
Because from the outside, the creative doesn't take a dip in from when you start to when you leave. It doesn't.
Here's the thing. I think it continued pretty viably for several years. But from my point of view, we were not as absolutely 100% where I wanted us to be and where I had intended for us to be.
Right.
That was my responsibility, not Pat's.
So you wanted to keep pushing it further.
I wanted great work, and I really, everything was secondary to great work, and including clients. When push came to shove, I wasn't going to do bad work. Not while I was there.
Yeah. And there's also another factor that I've read, which is the Dinka incident, I think it's called.
Oh, yeah, the Dinka thing.
Which is...
That's a funny thing. Pat found that Dinka picture in a National Geographic magazine at the Minneapolis Club, which is sort of like the businessman's club of Minneapolis.
Yeah.
and we were having lunch, and he showed me this picture. we both just cracked up. I mean, it was the funniest, most ironic and strange thing we'd ever seen. Is some sort of rite of passage to stick a kid's head up a cow's ass. I mean, it was just hilarious, and we couldn't help ourselves. We had to use it for something. I mean, this was too good not to share. So, some woman, a woman study professor at a small Minnesota college, had seen some of our work, and wrote to us to tell us that it was sexist and horrible. It had nothing to do with the Dinka thing.
Yeah.
You know? Just that we did sexist and horrible work. And so Pat and I composed this letter. And I really composed it. I mean, I wrote it, and Pat signed it, and I signed it. And we said, this is really unfortunate that you feel this way. And, since we're on the subject of things that are wrong with this world, we're enclosing this photo for you, and we think that you would be just the perfect person to stop this ugly, brutal rite from going on.
And she didn't laugh.
And no, she didn't laugh. No one laughed. I still laugh. I think Pat would if he were here. But it was funny. It could have been a white kid from Virginia, not some black Dinka, from 14-year-old kid from Africa. Our intentions were not racial. It was just hilarious, and that's the way we saw it. And we got ourselves in a ton of hot water.
I mean, the whole thing is from a distance. The ad that initially caused the problem was the one with Joan Collins and those guys. It said "bitch, bitch, bitch," which didn't seem. It's obviously a sort of accurate, jokey thing about the TV program. Didn't seem that controversial. Obviously, the letter was a sort of tongue-in-cheek joke and a bit cheeky, but that ended up costing you business.
It cost us business. It cost us the Wall Street Journal.
The Wall Street Journal left, did they, because of that?
Yeah, it was crushing. It was crushing to me. It was very crushing. And I had my day of laughter, and then I had my day of great depression.
Yeah.
Very, very sad. It just wasn't. It was not politically correct, and the Journal just didn't want to be associated with that sort of controversy.
Yeah.
So there you go. I finally got it. That's basically. That was basically the shot that took me out. It took a couple of years after that, I think, a year and a half.
And how long was that before you finally left, Tom?
Year and a half.
Year and a half. Okay.
That was the seed, though. That was it. That was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Right.
The beginning of the end.
So eventually, you agreed to go.
Well, what I did was I had a very bad weekend with drinking, and I got through the weekend. I blacked out. Didn't know precisely what I had done. I mean, I still to this day have no idea. I know that I woke up in a part of Minneapolis that I was not familiar with. At the wheel of my car.
Well.
Obviously fallen asleep someplace. And I decided to check myself into, or have my psychiatrist check me into Hazelden is quite a well-known place for sobriety in Minneapolis, in America. And I had seen other people go through there who I respected, and so that's what I did. When I went in there, that was essentially all she wrote. Because what happened was that we were pitching at that very moment that I was going into an alcohol rehabilitation center. We were pitching a very, very large liquor distributor.
Wow. What, you were working on that or overseeing it?
I wasn't working on it
But
yet,
the agency was
but
pitching.
we were about to. We were just about to go into a meeting, 2 weeks later. And I think it was too much for Pat.
Yeah.
Just too much. And probably too much for other people as well. And it was too much for me. I mean, I needed to get back on an even keel and just simply get some control in my life. I'd worked myself to death.
So when you finally left, was that a relief that there was no longer the pressure, or
it was a relief.
Were you wearing? Yeah.
No, it wasn't lugubrious at all. It was a relief. I don't mean like dance in the streets or anything. But
no, sure.
Other people probably felt, look, this silly fool. What's he gone and done now? But basically, I had done what I wanted to do. I had been very fortunate, very lucky, and I always knew that my days were measured. And I'd worked with great people. Nobody as good as Fallon as an account executive. Nobody on this planet.
Yeah.
And nobody better. I know in my heart, nobody better on earth ever than Ron Anderson.
Ron.
So I had a lot of good things happen. I got paid a ton of money. I got a lot of people saying a lot of nice things about me for most of the time I was in, and I had fun. I had the greatest fun. Ron Anderson and I ate a lot of great steaks together in New York.
So you have a break, presumably get your head together, and then hook up with Jay Chiat? Well,
yeah, I didn't. I was very ambivalent. I didn't know what to do for sure. I knew, it had gotten acrimonious at the end, as it had to.
Yeah.
At Fallon, and it was my fault. I take the responsibility. It's really, it was me. But Jay tried to hire me and Hal Riney.
Yeah.
Both of whom I admired, both of whom I knew, and I was a little afraid of Riney. He had a reputation for waiting till the last minute, till the agency had killed everybody in it, and then he would write the commercial and get it sold. And he was a brilliant writer.
Yeah.
So why not? Jay and I knew each other a bit more, and I actually thought we could probably make it work. But I was there in New York. I was made executive vice president, executive creative director of New York, Toronto, and London, and it was it was the sort of job where they prop you up at the head of the table.
Yeah.
And you say what you're supposed to say. And that wasn't me. I wanted to write. One of the good things is one of my last really interesting clients was at Chiat Day that I actually wrote for, Calvin Klein.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Did you launch the Obsession?
Obsession, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that was a good thing to have. But for the most part, I was a fish out of water. I really, and there was all sorts of politics going on in New York. Also, I think that I really, when it was all said and done, was really probably not going to be able to stay there. Jay made a speech one day to the creative department, just out of the blue. I'd been there maybe 3 months, and he said, "Let's get the creative department together." And I thought, well, sure. And so we got them all together in this space on Fifth Avenue, and I don't want to. I think highly of Jay, and I don't want to say anything bad about him. But he made a speech to the creative department that was so demoralizing that it just appalled me.
Right.
I just knew from that moment that I had to get out of there. It was utterly demoralizing speech, and I don't know why he did it. I don't know if that was typical of what Jay did, and maybe he did that to leave. I don't know, but I felt very badly.
And that was a kind of "you're not doing good enough" type thing, or we need to refocus?
No, it's that. Here's what the gist of it was this: advertising isn't fun. It stinks. It's a horrible business. I've been in it for 35 years, and it's always been horrible, and it always will be horrible. And there's not a goddamn fun moment in it, and I hate it.
Oh,
and
wow.
you should learn to hate it too, because it's a goddamn horrible business.
Great. So, all back to work.
yeah, exactly. Oh boy, I couldn't believe it. I don't know why he did that. Maybe that's what he did. I don't know, but
God, what a
it
mad...
wasn't my way. It was just whoa. Because I don't like advertising either. I mean, I certainly agree with Jay on that, but I guess I felt that there was hope for it.
Yeah. Doesn't help you get through it. How strange. So you left within about 9 months, was it?
Yeah, about 9 months. Yeah, and I should have just left and gone to Hawaii. But what I did instead was I met a couple of really bright people at Chiat Day. You still there?
Yeah.
Okay. A planner in Los Angeles by the name of Rob White.
Yeah.
A really brilliant guy. I mean, he was just articulate and thoughtful. It was really remarkable. The very best. And an account man who was a bit disingenuous in retrospect, but a very bright guy named Tony Wright from London.
Right.
And Tony and Rob, we got to chatting one day, and they thought we could start an agency, do it again. And I had this guy I'd hired a couple times previously, and I didn't realize how truly ill he was. He was actually a really sick guy. I mean, emotionally just gone.
Yeah.
And a guy named Morrison. Good guy, great art director, but I hired him at probably his most vulnerable time in life, and it was not a good combination. I also hired a money person, a senior vice president from the big bank in town. She was great, a person named Claire, and I that I tried to do it over again with really smart people.
And what was the difference?
I outwitted myself.
Yeah. And what was the difference between that and the first time? I guess.
Oh, hell. We were all Minneapolis people the first time. And we all knew each other, and we didn't have grand designs. We didn't know we had grand designs. We were just wanting to do great advertising, and that's all we wanted to do. And if we could get paid well for it, that was even better. The second time around, I think the expectations were that we would, certainly the expectations weren't clearly understood by me, because I saw Minneapolis as my place to live,
Yeah.
And it turned out, after some no small degree of acrimony, that Rob and Tony really didn't want to be in Minneapolis. I mean, they just didn't like it. It wasn't their kind of place. It wasn't cosmopolitan enough for Tony.
Yeah.
And Wright had, he was a Scot, and he spent time in, California, and he wasn't real big on Minneapolis. And I think if I had agreed, of course, I mean, without saying, I mean, if I had agreed, we'd open a New York office, we'd still be around.
Really, you think?
But I didn't want a New York office, and I didn't want to invest the kind of money that would require a New York office. We were financially viable overnight.
Because you
I got the Washington Post.
Did you? Right.
A couple of magazines. Got a big bank. Got we picked up a lot of business. But it wasn't enough for Tony, especially. He just insisted on being in New York. He had personal reasons for it, and it just didn't go.
So was it? I mean, obviously, I think you went for 2 years. Did you?
We're in business.
Yeah. Was it 2 years?
A year and a half, 2 years, something like that. Yeah. I was at the Cannes Film Festival. Of all places, judging the Cannes Film Festival, when I found out by telephone from somebody in my office that Tony had just fired one of my copywriters.
Oh, wow.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, and I just, that was the end of it, right there on the spot. That was the end of the agency. At that moment, on that telephone, it was over.
Right.
I mean, it stopped. That was the moment.
So did it feel good at any point, say the first 6 months when you were winning the Washington Post? And
yeah, it felt kind of good. I mean, I beat Pat Fallon out of a big piece of business.
Yeah.
Easy Spirit Shoes was a heavy advertiser in those days.
What were they called?
Easy Spirit.
Easy Spirit Shoes.
Yeah, and Pat and I had a brawl with that,
right.
and I won, and I felt really good beating him.
Yeah.
And yeah, so yeah, we had some good things happen. I mean, God, it was. I wasn't going to get back into expanding to New York or London or anywhere else. I was Minneapolis. I'd make it work there, or it would work nowhere. And since I was the guy with the money, there it was.
Yeah. So you were funding it. Yeah,
I was funding it. We were everybody had to make huge sacrifices in salary.
Sure.
So I mean, in truth, both Tony and Rob and John and Claire all took. They were making, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we all took huge cuts. So it wasn't just me funding it. I provided. We were very careful. I ended up getting Chiat Day's office space in Minneapolis, which we had opened up. They just had the lease, and I just took it.
Right.
And they were happy to have me take it.
Cool. So you hadn't completely fallen out with Chiat when you went?
Oh no, Jay and I remained friends.
Yeah.
Well, I did. I don't know. The last time I saw Jay, he was speaking at my son's graduation from the ad portfolio. What is the place called?
Yeah.
Ad Center.
Ad Center, right? The Portfolio Center. Yeah.
Yeah, the place in Richmond.
Yeah.
Yeah, my son, like me, was an English major as an undergraduate, and then he wanted to go into advertising, and I said, "Oh God, don't do that." Because I thought, he'll have this shadow.
Yeah.
This, And he went out and worked as a television producer for a year, and said, "Nope, I'm going into advertising." So at that point, I said, "Okay, I'll help you. I'll do what I can." And the best thing I could do was get him into that school with those people.
Yeah.
With some really good friends in Richmond. And yeah, that's all right.
So you came back from Cannes, left, closed down. What happened next? Sold?
Yep. Didn't sell. Just closed it down. And I have to tell you that a couple of my clients were very disappointed, and it was an awful thing to do, especially the Washington Post.
Yeah.
Because I had worked with this woman previously and at the Minneapolis Star and Tribune way back, and she had a lot of guts to go out and hire me out in Minneapolis, and it's a wonderful newspaper.
Yeah.
And so I really I let her down badly, and there it is. Yeah, and then I went to Hawaii. I said, "Oh, fuck it all, I'm out of here." And my wife and I had been vacationing there for years, and then we bought a place, and we went over there, and we basically lived in Hawaii for about 10 years, until we had grandchildren.
And then came back to Minneapolis. Because when I wrote a blog post on you about 2 years ago, lots of people from your creative department would say, if you ever find out where Tom is, let us know. Some would. I would say there was a last reported sighting. You were like Bigfoot. They'd say the last reported sighting was in Hawaii. Somebody said, I think he was teaching at a college in Minneapolis, but nobody knew where you were. You were like Salinger. So
yeah, I was. Salinger. There we go.
Yeah.
And I think
not a bad role model.
Ways, I have Salinger's. I'm a lot like Salinger's.
Yeah.
I really don't. I don't want to be public. I'm giving you this interview because God knows how much longer I'll be alive. but I really, I'm not a public person.
No.
So I went quietly off to Hawaii, and I began to study pottery.
Right.
I apprenticed myself to a very fine but alcoholic potter on the island of Kauai, and I sat by his side throwing pots for the next couple of years.
Wow. Is that something you still do?
Yeah, I still do. I don't do a lot now, but I became a pretty respectable potter, I have to say. I love pottery. I love the immediacy of it. The lump of clay that suddenly becomes something. And I found it very gratifying.
Well, good for you. I got some sense of how chilled your life is when you said, "Oh no, I didn't check my emails last week," which I've never heard anybody I've ever met use that phrase.
Oh,
I didn't look at my emails
I'm so
last
far
week.
out of the picture. It's ridiculous.
That's good for you.
I don't know what's going on.
So
my son is in advertising, and he basically is in an entirely different world than I am.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. I mean, we do talk. In fact, I'm going out there for Thanksgiving, but he's just in a different world, in a very creative world, but different than mine.
It's changed. You wouldn't recognise it, probably.
Pardon?
You wouldn't recognise it now, I don't think, advertising. It's very different.
I really wouldn't. And I sometimes, I sometimes want to get into it a little bit with Stephen, and Stephen doesn't mind. But I don't know. I don't know anything. I really, it's a completely different world.
Do you ever see anything that you admire in the way that you admired those old? This is a television mending a man. Is there anything that ever stimulates any?
It was Neil Drossman, by the way.
Yeah, it's the geek coming out in you.
Oh yeah, I do see work I admire.
Yeah.
I don't see very much. I see very, very little, in fact. Print is gone in the toilet.
Yeah.
Which was really where I made my mark. I did some fair to middling television, won a few awards.
Well, you did some great stuff with Sedlmeier. You were one of the early adopters of the Sedlmeier.
I love Joe. I was thinking about the fact that you had been talking to him, and he mentioned our disagreement. I felt bad about it.
Did you? I felt bad.
Because I really like Joe.
Well, he was. I felt bad telling you after. I thought, well, why am I telling him that? That's.
Oh yes, it's fine to tell me.
But
I just because that's it's a fact. But I really admired Joe.
I didn't realise when I spoke to Joe quite how much stuff you'd done together, and you were working with him in the early days. Before he was.
Way back. We went way back and did a lot of work. And Joe was just great. He's a genius.
Yeah.
Genius. Boy, somebody. I said to you the last time we spoke about him. Hollywood missed the boat, as they probably have on a lot of other people.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think they would. He said they wouldn't let him produce a film how he wanted. He wanted to get a concept and then make it funny, whereas he'd get these scripts full of jokes that he didn't particularly like. He said they just didn't know how to use me.
They paired him up with Rodney Dangerfield.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rodney Dangerfield, it was a funny man, a very funny man. I thought he was a very funny guy. But Joe wasn't going to take Rodney Dangerfield jokes and make a movie with them,
No.
Joe had his own sensibility. And it was extremely unique, really fresh and original. And it wasn't Rodney Dangerfield. And I think that experiment ended, probably for the best. It would have been bad for Joe.
Well, I think he said the final straw was that Rodney Dangerfield insisted towards the end that Rodney Dangerfield direct Rodney Dangerfield and Joe direct the other bits. So you can imagine it's not really Joe's thing to agree to something like that.
No. Yeah, Joe could get pretty heated.
Yeah.
Yeah. He did not brook any compromise.
No.
He was not a man for compromise, which is, of course, exactly why I liked him.
Yeah, his body of work is amazing.
It is amazing.
I mean, it's not like 12 great ads. There are hundreds of great ads.
Well, that's the thing that was so absolutely wonderful about Joe's work is you always knew that if you brought it to Joe, he would make it great. Now, I would try to write a script for Joe, I would try to do that. That was my goal in life.
Was it really? Yeah.
Scripts that Joe would accept. But I always knew that Joe would come through.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you're going to look at your emails next week. Perhaps I should email you his number.
Yeah, do that.
I'll email you his number. If you check your emails next week, it will be there.
Okay.
So, Tom, you've answered every single question.
Okay, good.
Amazing. I can't thank you enough for being so generous with your time.
Not at all. I appreciate the fact that you're interested enough to do an interview at this point.
It's amazing. And can't thank you enough. I will be in touch probably next week, and I'll get this transcribed, and we'll kind of figure out where we go next. But it's been absolutely fascinating.
I want you to know that wherever you go next is up to you. You can use any and all whatever I've said, and I don't have to see anything. I'd like to probably eventually. But it's your game now.
Okay, that's amazing. What can I say? Well, thanks again. Have a great weekend.
You too.
And
thank you for the call, and thank you for your interest.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thanks, Tom.
Right, bye,
great
Dave.
to talk to you. Thanks. Bye.